with Trump, okay, we don't know the specifics of the trade policies yet. There's talk of a 35% tax on Chinese imports. There's a border adjustment tax talk. But let's assume the worst case scenario, that you get the worst of protectionist policies. For Asian and Asian exporters in the short term, i.e. the next 12 months, what really matters is where the dollar is headed. And our view is that the dollar is going to weaken on the back of a softening US economy and the rate hike cycle coming to a stop. And that's good news for Asian exporters because it adds to global US dollar demand. Medium term, of course, it's a big shock to the integrated global manufacturing supply chain, and Asia lies at the heart of it. Japanese corporations are pretty exposed. If you look at the 10 biggest Japanese companies by market capitalization, on average, for them, over 60% of their sales revenues come from overseas. And the bulk of that is the US.
Okay, let me just start on your basic premise that the dollar's going to weaken on the back of weakening and economic fundamentals. I'm seeing very little sign of that, Shamina, actually, at the moment as well. And I've felt of all waiting to see what the Federal Reserve says about this week as well, and then payroll as well. But consumer spending, housing data, even inflation data, is all ticking up nicely, building us up to another rate hike, isn't it? So your premise that the dollar may weaken, may I challenge you on that one?
Yeah, sure you can. And I'm going to have to disagree with you on some of the data.
It's the meat of this show people disagree, so don't be polite about it.
I think the data points, the flashpoints that everyone's focused on have been the wage growth numbers.
Yes.
The unemployment numbers weren't that great. If you look at the retail spending numbers, there's been a bit of an uptick towards the end of the year, but the underlying is pretty weak. And if you look at most of the wide range of housing market data, it's still fairly weak. And to us, the signs are that the economy is softening. It's not picking up. And the market has got itself ahead of itself in terms of rate hike expectations. And looking at 2-3, we think the Fed and Yellen is going to be able to get one more through. And as market expectations on interest rates adjust, the dollar will weaken.
Okay.
You do have a point, because if you look at the trade around the Swiss franc, it's climbed to a 7-month high. No one really wanted to touch the Swissy after what the Swiss National Bank did with the currency almost 2 years ago now. So I think investors are now looking for other safe havens. Yen seems to be back in favour. And if I can just hone in on the yen, because at one point it looked like 120 would just be the next level we'd see on markets, but that's not been the case. We've come right back to the 114 handle. What does that mean for inflation expectations now for the Bank of Japan and the amount of stimulus we're likely to have from the central bank this year?
Well, I mean, you know, Bank of Japan and Governor Kuroda is still targeting 2% inflation, although, you know, the target date for that seems to be moving further and further into the future. But at the moment, you know, inflation has picked up a bit and everyone's kind of pretty happy. But the reality is, headline inflation is picking up on the back of imported inflation, which is down to some weakness in the yen and higher commodity prices. If you look at core inflation, there's very little underlying pricing pressure in the economy, which tells you it tells you in itself about how strong that economy is.
So a high yen would offset any of that inflationary pressure.
Exactly.
But what kind of level on a high yen are we talking about? The 114 handle where we are now, or much firmer than this level?
We expect you know, further strengthening of the yen from where it is, from 114. You know, and our view is based on two things. One is fundamentals, and there we're looking at basically Japan's adjusted resource gap, basically, which is, you know, net FDI plus the current account balance as a percentage of GDP, and that's rising pretty steeply. And our view on the US dollar, if you take those together, it argues for yen strengthening.